Hi, and welcome back to English 102. Today we're going to talk about CRAAP testing. This is one of my favorite concepts I get to talk with you about as your English 102 instructor. It is not just because I'm a bit juvenile and I like that the acronym is CRAAP, right? It is because this is a really empowering tool, I feel like. Because here's the thing. Most students, if not all students, know they can't trust everything they read online. They know that many media sources may have some kind of bias or at least some sort of political leaning, right? And they want to try to figure out how to evaluate things, right? And CRAAP testing is an objective tool you can use to evaluate a source to make sure it's credible enough for what? Credible enough to use with an academic reader, right? Because all of these papers that you're going to be writing for me about your subtopic, they're all going to be designed for an academic audience. And so we have to be sure that you have chosen sources that are credible enough to use with that audience. That's one of the really big things you're supposed to leave 102 with is this confidence that you can locate, not just locate sources about your topic, but really sift through them and find the best ones. So let's go ahead and talk about how to do that. So, like it says here, before you decide you're going to use a source in the initial research findings paper or any paper, you should give it the CRAAP test. The other cool thing about it being an acronym is that it helps you remember the different things you should be thinking about when you select a source. And here's the best part. You don't even have to read the source in entirety to test all of these things. For example, let's look at the C. Is the information current? Well, there's a pretty easy way to tell how current your source is, right? Most credible periodicals include a publication date with the article. Most students know intuitively that they should not use a source that is, over 10 years old in a paper like this because it's going to have outdated information. And indeed, I think you can probably find lots of great sources within the last 5 years, to be honest with you. If you wanted to go beyond 5 years, a source beyond 5 years old, I think that would be okay as long as you had very good reason for doing so, right? What maybe this source offers something that some of the other newer ones don't. But certainly, you should never have something that's older than 10 years old for any of the projects in this class. Okay, interestingly enough, there are some government websites out there that don't have publication dates because they're constantly being updated. And that doesn't mean that you can't use them, right? There's other things that you can do to be sure that the thing is being updated, right? And as we'll see, when you do CRAAP testing, it's not black and white, right? You have to look at all the letters, right? You may have an article that's like 5 years old and you think, well, maybe I could find one that's a little newer, but then maybe it is highly authoritative, right? And that kind of makes it even more a better choice, right? Well, authoritative is one of the A's. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first we have to do R, which is for relevance. Now, the idea of them calling it relevant is a little bit misleading because this first part is easy. Students know how to choose articles that are relevant, right? That relate to the topic. But here's the thing. If you're writing for an academic audience, as I'm asking you to, they have a certain expectation about the level of the source. For example, most students know intuitively you would not want to use the National Enquirer, something you find at the grocery store in the checkout line, as a source in an academic paper, right? But it's important to think about why. And that conversation has to do with what I like to call level, which is related to relevance. Is it at the right level? Level is a bit complicated, so I've included an activity for it in Canvas to help you kind of look at some actual articles and rank them to help you learn more about this. So why don't you go ahead and pause this video and then go and pull Canvas up into another tab and click next so that you can see the page that has to do with the level assignment, and then you can come back to this. Okay, hopefully you checked out how to see if your source is at the right level page, all right? So you've got a good understanding of what the characteristics of a low, medium, and high level source. You want sources that are medium or high in the papers you write for my class. In the initial research findings paper, you probably just want medium level sources. You can save the high level academic journal article sources for the annotated bibliography. All right, enough about relevance and level, right? Let's move on to authority. This is big, right? Because here's the thing, anybody can get anything on Google. And just because it makes it into your first page of results, that does not mean that the person is an authority. It might just mean that they write a lot of articles for the internet. Okay? What makes someone an authority? Well, sometimes that can be credentials, meaning letters after their name. For example, if someone is writing an opinionated article about whether we should raise the minimum wage or not, we would expect them to have some credentials, perhaps as an economist or something like that, right? So again, you want to evaluate the author of your source to see what makes them an expert. Most sources include what's called a byline, where they give you some information about the author. They tell you where they went to school, or if they're a journalist, they tell you what areas they specialize in, maybe some awards they won. These are things that show that they are more credible. Because, of course, think about it. I'm your English 102 teacher, right? I'm a credible person to give you instruction in source discovery, writing, and things like that. But I have no authority to teach an astronomy course. I don't have the proper credentials. I don't have the proper experience. All right, so now I'm hoping that you're starting to see how to think about authority. Now, here's the thing. If you don't find a lot of things that suggest the author is an authority, or maybe you might have a source that does not have a named author, okay? The sources and issues and controversies, the issues and controversies database do not have named authors, but they're still great sources. If you haven't looked at that database yet, there's a page down the road that'll help you look at it. Anyhow, if there's no named author, you can check out the periodical itself. For example, if you found an op-ed by the New York Times editorial board, well, then it's an editorial, not an op-ed, right? But if you have found an editorial by them, there won't be a named author. So how do you tell if they're credible? Well, you try to figure out if the New York Times is credible, right? And so you want to try to learn more about them. Most periodicals, most legitimate ones, have what's called an About Us page. So you could just type New York Times About Us into Google, right? And this goes for online periodicals too, like the National Review. They want to tell you about their story. They want you to learn what their mission is, right? And these, when you find pages like this, they're going to tell you what awards they've won. They're going to tell you how long they've been around, and that's going to show you what makes them trustworthy, right? And here's the cool thing, right, is that if you come across someone's blog, which is really well put together, right, and it almost makes you feel like it's a periodical, the minute you try to research who this person is and what this blog is, everything unravels, right? And you realize they don't have any proof of why you should trust them. Okay, as is noted at the bottom here, the URL, the web address, can give you some clues, right? .gov and .edu you can generally trust. If you find some information about the opioid crisis on the Johns Hopkins .edu webpage, I think you can trust that. That's one of the best medical schools in the country, right? .com and .org doesn't mean you can't use it, but it means it requires further evaluation. I know this is a stale meme, but I don't care. I love Lord of the Rings. Anyhow, I do have an asterisk here because, there is a person who writes a blog for a prestigious periodical called The Economist, and this person has a PhD in economics, right? So this person's blog you could certainly use, but let's be honest, the vast majority of blogs that you find on WordPress, or Blogspot or things like that are written by people who don't have any credibility. If you see something that looks like a blog or is labeled as such, you should not use it without consulting me first. I can work with you to make sure that they've got enough authority. You should never use Wikipedia, right? Because there's no way to tell who the author is. There are always multiple authors of Wikipedia articles, and they don't generally include their real names. So while Wikipedia has some useful information, that is not something you should cite in an academic paper, and you should not use quotes or facts from a Wikipedia article. If you really like Wikipedia, consider using the citations page that accompanies some of their articles, and that's where you can find sources you could actually potentially use. Wait a minute, we're not done talking about authority. So I do have one more in-class activity is what I would call it if we were in person, right? But I'm going to give you some examples of articles to help you determine, the authority of the author and the periodical. So go ahead, pause this again, and move forward on the pages and the modules to find the activity that talks about how to tell if your source has enough authority. All right, I bet you've got a good idea how to tell if a source has enough authority to use in an academic paper. One more reminder, remember, when you evaluate these things, you have to be willing to say, hey, I'm not going to use the source, right? I've had students, they will come across a student paper on Google where a student at some other university wrote a paper about social media, and then they'll try to use that, and I'll take like mad points off, and I'll say, this person doesn't have any more authority to write about social media than you do because they're a student like you, right? When you're writing for an academic audience, you want to use people who have more authority than you, right? Journalists, perhaps, or experts in the field, not other students. Okay, what's next? Accuracy, really, with this one, and again, I'm hoping that you see that everything else we talked about up until this point, these are things you can evaluate without even reading the article. You can look for the byline. You can look up the periodical to figure out what makes them authoritative. You can scan the article's length and word choice to determine level. None of this requires actual reading of the thing, right? And so the idea is that we're saving you time. You don't even bother reading those articles that are 10 years old. You don't even bother looking at the blogs because you know they won't work, right? To evaluate accuracy, you really have to have read the thing, right? Because this is when you're doing some critical thinking about, okay, are they not, there are plenty of main articles in the newspaper or news outlets that don't include citations, right? But they still tell you where their facts are coming from. They do things that help you feel more confident about the accuracy of the information, right? So that's something that you can think critically about as you are looking at those sources. Again, this is mostly designed to help you identify things that are not from authoritative outlets like blogs, where people are just kind of saying whatever the heck they want without any real facts or data to back them up. The last letter is the P for purpose. You want to think about what is this source trying to do, right? If it is from a legitimate periodical or from the library, most of the sources are designed to either inform you or persuade you, right? There's nothing that is biased always about persuasive writing. You can do persuasive writing without bias. Indeed, most legitimate media outlets have an opinion page, right? And they encourage both editors and outside experts to come in and offer their opinions on things. That's what op-eds are, right? They're an important part of the discourse about your topic. Of course, you need informational articles too. Again, you need 2 informational articles and 1 opinionated article, an op-ed, for example, in your initial research findings paper. So these purposes are fine, right? But when you look at those low-level sources like National Enquirer, People Magazine, they're designed for entertainment, right? This is not something you want to use with an academic reader. Beware of sites that are designed to sell something, right? If you are looking for information about social media, you probably don't necessarily want to use a site that is working to sell you a social media rep for your company, right? They have, their purpose is not as, I don't think pure is the right word, but their purpose is not as beneficial to you as these are, right? But I think most of us, you can tell purpose, even though that's the last letter. The way I have this assignment structured, you have to think from the very beginning, what is this article, right? Is it news? Is it informational news? Or is it an opinionated piece designed to persuade me, right? And I think the level activity has made things like this really kind of stand out for you, and you've probably already dispensed with them before you even get to the P. Because again, you have to be willing to dispense with some sources here. The whole point of CRAAP testing is that you're not choosing the first three sources you come across. You're choosing the best, most credible sources you come across. Because of course, credibility is on a continuum. It is not black and white. There are some sources that are more authoritative than others, right? There are some that have so little authority that you wouldn't want to use them at all, right? That's what makes CRAAP testing challenging and fun. I hope you found this helpful. Of course, if you ever are not sure if your source passes the CRAAP test, shoot me an email, stop by office hours, and we'll rap about it. That's all I got. Have a good one.